Katniss Everdeen. Where are you? Come on up. Well, come on up. I volunteer as tribute.
We interrupt this program to bring you...
All right, everybody. My name is Kevin.
I'm Adam.
And I'm Julie.
And we are the Real Movie Guys, and welcome back to another episode of The Real Review, the series where we review and discuss all your favorite movies. On today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at The Hunger Games. Katniss Everdeen voluntarily takes her young sister's place in The Hunger Games, a televised competition in which 2 teenagers from each of the 12 districts of Panem are chosen at random to fight to the death. Wow, Hunger Games is an interesting movie. And what I mean by that is, just in juxtaposition of when it came out, I think is more fascinating than the actual movie to me. This movie came out in 2012, which is kind of right. Young adult fiction and young adult movies were in a very strange spot around that time. If you kind of go back and take a look, we had Harry Potter, we had the magic craze, and then suddenly we had the Twilight vampire craze out of nowhere. And then suddenly we had the post-apocalyptic children killing each other phase. Again, media is just a very, very interesting thing when you go to watch at it. And I think The Hunger Games, out of everything that kind of came out around that time, I think is the better of the series, minus Harry Potter is in its own league. But as far as like the other like YA crazes that came out, I think The Hunger Games is the better of the series. And while I do think The Hunger Games at its core concept is really interesting and really good, this first movie really isn't that great in my opinion. It does some things I think that are interesting. The actors are really good, especially the adult actors I think are fantastic, and they really do carry this movie. There's some really interesting concepts, especially like why the Hunger Games exist. But unfortunately, the Hunger Games, it feels like a Cliff Note version of maybe a larger story that they wanted to tell. And I feel like there were just like bits and pieces missing. So if you do read the books, we're not going to go too much into that, because I do think I think that's a discussion that doesn't need to be had really between the book and the movie. I think they too should be able to stand up on their own 2 feet. But the Hunger Games movie, it's a fine time. How it became such this big series, I'll kind of never understand, because I don't think it was that good. But at the same time, I can understand why there are a lot of fans. Adam, this is your first experience with the film. What did you think?
I liked it. I didn't hate it.
Right.
It was, I mean, okay, so should I? Okay, I'll say because we watched the first one and the second one.
Okay,
the second one I enjoyed this much more.
Yeah.
This much more.
Yes.
I can't wait to talk about the second one, but
yeah, I agree. But looking back on it, the first one is good. But I have some issues with it. It's definitely a little bit of a slog in that first, honestly, like 3/4 of the movie.
Yeah, pacing's a murder in this movie. Absolutely.
Yeah. But it's tough because they have to set it up.
Right.
But like everything else, the set pieces, the costume design, the acting is great. So for what we were given, I enjoyed the majority of the film.
Yeah, again, I just have a lot of problems with the movie, so maybe it kind of comes down a little bit harder on me. But I can see what you're saying, though. There's definitely a lot of good things, and we'll talk about everything fairly. I'll give it the benefit of that. Maybe I'll change my mind by the end of this. But Julie, how about you? I know you're itching to talk about this. This was like her big thing, so talk to me.
well, first off, I love the Hunger Games. I love the book series. I love the movie series. Does the movie have flaws? Absolutely. But I think it was a really good first outing. there definitely are some dead spots in the movie that can be very frustrating. And then there's pieces where there could be so much more in those action scenes, but they feel very abrupt, where we just spent, 15 minutes of her in a tree kind of thing. But again, like the setting, the acting, all of the Capitol outfits and sets are amazing. Does the series get a little bit better as it goes on? Absolutely. But for a first movie, I think it was a good outing.
Yeah, I don't think it's... See, so here's my issue with some of this movie. A lot of it is, I think the world is fantastic in this movie. I really do. I really think there's a really rich lore story here, right? Between all the different districts, how they're kind of put out, and then you also have the Capitol, where they're all these rich, high society people that dress obnoxiously, and they overindulge on everything in this entire world. The problem with my first outing with this movie is that I don't really get a sense of, I mean, besides what they're showing me, and I always do agree with the show but don't tell, I think I would have liked a little bit more of an explanation about how this world's kind of working, because it does move at breakneck pace at some points, and then suddenly it's a slog to get through at other points. And I think maybe my best example is this. So there's other sci-fi movies that you can compare this to. I think maybe even not even a sci-fi movie, but I think let's compare it to the Harry Potter series, just for a real quick instance of a series that's kind of like in that general genre of young adult, I guess you could say. And there's a scene in the beginning of Harry Potter where Harry goes to Hogsmeade for the first time, which is like the big magical marketplace. And he's walking around Hogsmeade. He's seeing all these wonderful things, and you're starting to learn a little bit more about the world, right? You're starting to see like all these different magical things kind of popping out, and they're telling a story visually as Harry's experience everything. In Hunger Games, I never kind of get that. Like, sure, everyone's dressed obnoxiously and whatever, but I think there needed to be a little bit more world building as far as visualization. Another movie that does it, and which is a sci-fi movie, is Blade Runner. Blade Runner does that fantastically, where the detective, he's walking through the city and you just see how the city's operating, and it's on a visual level, not so much telling me everything, but again, this visual world building that I really liked. Hunger Games is really concerned with moving the plot forward, and it kind of forgets to do that, to add this extra layer of depth that I know is available to be told in this movie. Unfortunately, I think it just misses the mark on that.
I think part of the problem too, the budget is ridiculous, but it's so small comparatively to the other movies.
Definitely not in this movie.
Yeah, so I feel like this movie really struggled with budget constraints, and you can see it when it comes to the Capitol. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if it's that they wanted to but couldn't include certain things. But I agree, like even the opening thing where, they're at the reaping and they're playing the little clip of, there was an uprising and this is what happened. Like there could have been more storytelling done in that. I think even the opening of the movie, it's just a black screen and it says, every year 12, districts choose 2 people. So when it comes to that, background, they could have, been a little bit more elaborate with, flashbacks, or more like they could have done an opening with my favorite character, Caesar Flickerman, like just doing a recap of like the history of the Hunger Games. And I think that would have been more successful. Yeah,
again, that would have maybe fallen more into the tell, don't show category, which I don't know if I would have personally liked. I know, but I understand what you're saying due to time. What do you think, Adam? What do you think of the world building that's kind of done just initially? Do you think it's sufficient? Do you think there could have been some more time spent?
Yeah, I do, because in the beginning when I had to read and
that's
I don't know,
thing.
I was like
big old text box right at the start of the movie.
Immediately, like I hit play, and then I was looking at my phone, or I was grabbing something, and I was like, "Crap! What did that say? I'm missing stuff. Crap!" And then a little bit later, you can't, like, when there's sort of lore building, you can't look away because you're gonna miss significant stuff. And I don't like that I don't have a frame of reference to how big the Capitol is compared to the districts. I don't know where any of that is.
Yes, right.
Because they have to take a train to go everywhere.
Right,
there's all these woods in between. I'm like, okay,
the map of Panem is a very contested issue. You got to find like the legit ones. But again, that's something where I'm always like, where is this comparatively?
But and the Capitol, that is interesting now that you say that, because there is no scale reference to everything.
Denver, Colorado.
Yeah, I would have liked that. I would have I don't know. I probably would have liked a little more world building around the Capitol because, I mean, as we said earlier, it moves at breakneck speeds because you go from the slums and all of a sudden here they are in this lavish, like, I'm like, whoa.
Right.
That there's a very definite line there of, poor and rich or something like that.
Right. And it's very interesting that the societies, and again, there's a lot of themes, I guess you could say, in this series, which will become even to the series' detriment a little bit later on, in my opinion, where they kind of spend a little bit too much time with those themes. But you do need them in this movie because I think they are powerful regardless of the story that you're trying to tell. Let's go into some of the acting. So here's the thing. All the adults in this movie are powerhouse actors, I think, in my opinion. They really help elevate this younger cast of actors. Jennifer Lawrence at this time was not a thing, so don't come out to me saying Jennifer Lawrence was the best actress who ever graced the screen and, whatever she's considered to be now. She's definitely not super comfortable in this movie. And unfortunately, a lot of it, I think, has to do with her character of Katniss. I just don't like the character Katniss. I think she's kind of very unlikable and grumpy and just, it's just, again, I know that's how she's supposed to be portrayed and, whatever the case is. But so it's tough. Part of me is like, well, is it Jennifer Lawrence's fault? Is it the way the character's written? I think there's a lot of discussion to be had there. But again, I just in general, I don't like the character of Katniss, especially when... we'll talk a little bit some of the other reasons a little bit later, but I know Julie's ready to bite my head off, so go ahead.
I was just gonna say, wouldn't you be grumpy if you were starving, living hour to hour, and then you had to go fight to the death for rich people's entertainment?
Yeah, sure, but it's just I feel like she's kind of unlikable. How about you, Adam? It's a hot topic.
Grumpy is a funny word for her. I like that.
Because especially in this kind of series, you kind of want a hopeful protagonist to some extent, and I feel like I never really get a feeling of hope within the character of Katniss. Again, this is just early on, you know what I mean?
That's true, because she's just kind of thrown into this. She's like, oh, damn, I gotta go do this. And she just seems upset the entire time that she has to go participate in the Hunger Games.
Right, and I think I just would have liked her being a little more, and again, I know that's the character they're going for. I understand it, but there had to be something a little bit more to endure me to that character. Like, yes, I know the epic scene, and it is a great scene where she volunteers as tribute for her sister who gets selected, and like the chances were extremely low that Prim would have ever been chosen. That scene's fantastic in this movie. They block it out beautifully. The color grading, I think, is fantastic. The slum scenes are very, very well done, especially when you have like a character like Effie who comes in who's all bright and dolled up in this bright colored character and this like, oh, look at you, oh, poor peasant, oh no, but everything's still great and wonderful, and then this horrible thing happens.
The shot of her walking down the dirt road with her umbrella and she's like hobbling in her heels. It's such a great contrast.
Right, and they do a really great job with that. And again, I think the visual blocking is fantastic too. When they select her, you're like, your heart kind of does sink for like, it's like, I mean, I know I've seen it before and maybe it's cliche to say, but I do think it does for like a hot second. You're like, oh man, you picked her, and it's just like everything stops. There's no sound. This movie has sparks of brilliance like that, I think.
I really liked. I mean, I do like the contrast of, like I said earlier about the, between the poor and the rich. It is nice, and I would have preferred more. But I also liked how I like the scene with Katniss where she shoots the apple from the pig's mouth.
Yeah.
I like that scene a lot because I feel like that definitely sets the tone more for that Katniss character.
And maybe that's what I wanted more of. Maybe something that rebellious spark, that spark of rebellion that's kind of in her. That's kind of what I was looking for.
That's what I liked a lot.
Not just being kind of grumpy all the time. Like I really wanted that spark of like, a rebellious nature to her, which I think that's what probably makes her more endearing than anything else. Like, she sacrificed herself for her sister to kind of go into these games, but there's also something like, I'm not going to lay down and die. I'm going to keep fighting. And I feel like that just never comes across super well throughout her character development. Maybe later on there's a little bit better, but early on, we're talking about this movie right now.
Yeah, that is a great scene too, because I feel like that moment is what really endears Haymitch to her, because the two of them, I mean, they're always at odds, But after that, Effie's screaming at her, like, "Are you crazy? I can't believe you did that." And Hamish is like, "Nice job." Like, so again, he sees that spark of fight in her. So he's like, "All right, you're someone worth me fighting for you, on your behalf, trying to get you sponsors." So,
well, since you brought it up, Woody Harrelson's in this movie playing Haymitch, and he is by far, next to Effie in this movie, played by Elizabeth Banks, is the best character in this movie. I don't know if Woody Harrelson was actually drinking throughout the filming of this series, but he's fantastic in every scene. He steals the scene, and he really works well with these characters, selling that given up kind of spirit. And then when he sees kind of a little bit of like, oh, hey, maybe we can do something different for a change, you see something come different out of the Haymitch character. But Woody Harrelson's acting on all cylinders in this movie, and it's great to see. I think the younger cast really works well with these these older actors. Julie brought up Effie, played by Elizabeth Banks, who's like the symbol of kind of the rich, the hierarchy, and everything like that. And she does a great job as well too. She becomes a little bit more involved later on in the series, but early on she has some really scene-stealing initial scenes in this movie, which I think are fantastic. But that's just to say, I know, Julie, why don't you talk about President Snow? Because he isn't utilized as much in this movie, but he's going to be, and being played by a Sutherland also helps as well. The Sutherland
is just a powerhouse again, like you said, he's not utilized as much as he could be. And I'm not even doing book comparisons. I'm not sure where he stands in that regard, but he is such a presence, even from that opening, them arriving in the Capitol for the parade and him, calming the crowd. Like, those few scenes he has is just show stopping, where you're like, this is a force to be reckoned with. And how early on he can spot, the glimmer of hope that Katniss is bringing to the Capitol. I love that scene he has with the game maker, Seneca Crane, where he's like, hope is good. You don't want them not to have hope, but too much hope, that's what sparks rebellion. And that's what an issue is. So we need to really squash that as soon as possible.
Right. And what do you think of that, Adam? Because I think that's probably one of the driving forces in this movie, though. That's the more interesting things that I found myself latching to, like those kind of scenes where we've learned more about how oppressive this kind of world really is.
Absolutely. It shows the tone of like how much control they have over this situation.
Right.
Which I love that. That's good world building there.
Yeah, and it makes it more interesting, especially when we get to later on. We'll talk about the actual Hunger Games, but I think it's incredibly more interesting. I think the adult cast is superior in this movie. Lenny Kravitz.
Forget about Caesar Flickerman.
Caesar Flickerman is Stanley Tucci is a fine actor. We all know that. He's got the charm and the charisma that we all want of someone who's pretty much a pawn piece, a mouthpiece for the Capitol, which I really like his character. I think he really brings a lot of charm. And again, a lot of these like themes of like, the ignorance of the media, kind of like being controlled by the government and all that fun stuff that we know and love. I think it's a really good job, and it juxtapositions the characters, because without those characters, I don't know how well like Jennifer Lawrence really would work without being able to bounce off of some of these better actors. And I don't know, maybe she actually learned something with these interactions, because she is a fine actress now. Jennifer Lawrence has greatly improved over the years. But you can see, like, again, maybe this experience did help to some extent. The one bad thing, and I know this is in the book, so, whatever, the love triangle thing, it's a YA thing, and then we're kind of getting the starts of it with Josh Hutcherson, who we recently, if you've seen our 5 Nights at Freddy's review, he kind of popped up recently. But Peeta Mellark, I don't like Peeta. I don't like his character at all. I think he's incredibly boring. He's kind of the beta guy, hounding over the girl. And then you kind of have Gale, who's this other love thing that Katniss has going on back at home, who's barely in the movie, right? He's kind of in there for a hot minute, and then he's like watching the screen all disappointed when Peeta and them kiss, and he's like, oh, that's a love triangle going on. But I guess I'll give Gale a little bit of a slide for right now, because he wasn't too involved with this movie, and Liam Hemsworth is nothing to write home about as far as his acting. Like, God, he was just reading his lines, wasn't he? He was just not even giving it any effort. But Peeta, on the other hand, just the way they characterize him throughout this movie, I don't really like him. I'm sorry. I really just found myself not being interested. He's really short compared to Katniss too, which also is another thing. He's supposed to be like this big, strong guy who's throwing sacks of flour and beating people up. I don't get it. All right, Julie, come on.
How dare you? Eden Lark is a treasure. And Josh Hutcherson does such a good job. I can't even... His scenes with Caesar Flickerman are awesome with the interview process.
Sure, I think those are good, but when
even the way he talks to Katniss too, like
I'll follow you no matter what. That's what I'll do. I'm PETA.
It doesn't always stay that way, but he does such a good job in this movie. I think he really brings a lot of heart to it because, again, we talked about how Katniss is super grumpy, and I feel like you're very quickly endeared to PETA because, again, like
I gave you some burnt bread
in the rain.
In the rain.
Bread. He cared about. She was starving. She would have died without that bread. Again, he's an angel. How dare you?
He's a beta guy. He kind of just hangs around Katniss. You know, it's kind of what he's there for. Adam, what do you separate us? What's going on? What did you think of PETA? Honestly.
At first, I did not really care for his character.
Okay.
Because at the first interaction, I'm like,
chemistry.
I write him off. There's nothing here for me.
Yeah.
As we progress, first off, I was like, he can paint really well.
Really well, like realistically.
This guy's a nerd. And then, when he painted himself with the camouflage, I was like, where did he get all that paint?
Right.
But besides that, I think I liked it. It was not bad. I think I definitely like Katniss more than PETA currently.
Right.
I guess because she is the main character of the Hunger Games.
Right. I
didn't hate him though. He was just kind of there for me.
I wouldn't say I hate. I just don't really care for him.
You're very harsh on him.
I am very harsh on him. I just don't really like him. I don't
directed towards Gale. Gale sucks.
Well, we're only talking about the first movie right now, so we'll talk about the
first movie too. Katniss, so stupid.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of corny dialogue. A lot of the delivery is not fantastic, but again, we kind of get distracted by the more seasoned actors that are actually like handling their lines in this movie. But let's jump into what's probably the most important thing about the Hunger Games, and that is the Hunger Games themselves. So this is where I feel like maybe more so than anything else is where the movie missteps the most, in my opinion. I do not like the way they filmed any of the action in this movie. I really think it's nothing but shaky cam, a bunch of zoom ins to everything that's going on, trying to hide things, and it's a mess visually. Whenever there's some kind of action on the screen, I can barely see what's going on because they're too busy shaking the camera all over the place and just like zooming in the most awkward things. It's a train wreck when it comes to the action. Again, this is another conversation we had recently about another movie, but this movie has to be PG-13 and you can get away with it. And I remember the first time I watched this, I did say to myself, I wished it was rated R to some of the violence, but going back and watching it now after all these years, I think they did an okay with some of the violence that's portrayed in this movie. I don't think it needed to be rated R. I think they actually did a sufficient job with it because it's, teenagers murdering teenagers and kind of kids at the same time, depending on the age, where I kind of lose interest. And I know this might be another book thing is like, I don't have any idea for the rest of the people in the Hunger Games besides Katniss and PETA. Everyone else is just generic character number one, generic character number two. Oh, that guy's slightly bigger than the other guy, so he might be a little bit tougher than the guy that's next to him. I really wish we had something more to do with the characters in the Hunger Games, and that is something that's corrected shortly after. But again, for this first movie, I think it was more important for that to be in this outing. Adam, what do you think of that? Do you think there should have been something more with those characters?
I was thoroughly disappointed that when the Hunger Games first begin and we start losing, other characters,
right?
I could not keep track of who was dying.
It, right?
Like I understand that they show us, with the with the little
projection in the sky.
Yes, projection, yes. Who died. But I'm like, I wanted to see that. Like, it all happened so fast. I was so disappointed that I wasn't able to actually see anything that was going on. Because I was like, I think I saw that guy earlier. was that person? Or was that the other person? Like,
And some of them look identical to other ones, so I have no idea who's going on. Besides, there's one character that stands out, but the rest of them are pretty much,
yeah. For the most part, I was kind of disappointed in that aspect. So I would have liked a little bit more. I mean, like you said, it does get a little bit better,
later
with
on
the next film.
Right. But right now, I think it would have been important to give us some kind of substance with some of these characters.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
And I feel like there's a misstep. How about you, Julie? I know you want to talk about it, so.
No, I do completely agree with both of you on that point. Especially the beginning scene. Like, aside from a handful of the tributes, like, you don't know who any of these people are. You don't know where they're from. You don't know anything about them. So it's just very jarring. I mean, you could look at it in a grander scheme of like, this is what it is to the Capitol. They're just, fodder. And the shaky cam doesn't help because, again, you can't get a clear grasp. And again, they're doing it because of the PG-13 rating. And I guess it was a stylistic choice.
It was. Well. I mean, 2012, you had a lot of action movies kind of in that sphere of doing things like that. Like, if you shake the camera really hard, that means there's action going on screen. And I was just never a fan of that. And most people aren't. I think we've kind of evolved beyond that at this point.
Yeah. There's that. And then, so you have that high action opening into the games. And then there's just a lot of dead space where it's Katniss running and hiding, and then a little bit of action, running and hiding again.
And would you say it never feels tense? Because that's my argument to that too. You can have a lot of, like, The Hunger Games is very quick when you look at the grand scheme of how long this movie is. This movie comes in at 2 hours and 22 minutes. I want to say maybe The Hunger Games is 40 minutes long. Does that sound about right? Maybe a little longer.
I'd say it'd have to be a little longer.
But the problem is there's not much tension, so it feels like a slog to get through. After we already went through all this beginning of the movie getting here, and now we're finally at the Grand Hunger Games. There's bits where action happens, bits where action doesn't. I understand this is kind of like a Lord of the Flies situation. Everyone's kind of in it for themselves, surviving, and I never feel any tension necessarily throughout the remainder of the Hunger Games.
The only other excuse I could give it, and they do have a throwaway line in it, is the majority of the people in the Hunger Games don't actually die from like combat or being killed. They die from exposure to other, natural elements in the arena. So the fact that like most of the time when Katniss almost dies, it's because she has like a burn on her leg or got like a scratch and stuff like that. So there, as much as it's about fighting, there is also kind of adapting to the arena itself.
But the problem is you have to make that interesting.
Right.
And I don't think that comes across really in this movie. What do you think, Adam? What do you think of the Hunger Games as a concept in general? We've seen this before in media. I know people don't like when you talk about it, but there is a movie called Battle Royale that was kind of similar to this. But again, this is another adaptation, so it is what it is, right? There's something else. Someone adapted it differently. What do you think of the idea of the Hunger Games? Do you like that concept that's in this movie, or?
There's so many battle royales to compare it to nowadays. Right. I think that this was definitely one of the stronger representations of the battle royale, I think.
Okay.
Especially in a movie. Definitely not utilized to its fullest yet. Mm-hmm. But I can see now I can see why these were so popular. It was because I think it was pretty decent, especially because, it was one of the first of its kind at that time. So it makes sense.
Right. And I think it is. I think there is. It's just, unfortunately, it's just so bogged down, I think, by the way they decided to film the action.
Right.
It's kind of what hurts this, because the story of it itself, and I think the ending actually is pretty interesting by the time we get to the end of the Hunger Games, and there can only be one winner, but we end up leaving with two. And I think they did a good job with that. Again, I know it's based on the book, so it's something that preceded it. They can't take credit for it, but they did a good job with that. And I think that does endear me to the next movie, which I don't know at the time when this was made if all the sequels were planned. I think they were at that point. I'm not too sure, but there's a clear jump between this movie and the next movie, and that's something we'll talk about a little bit later. But at the end of the day, I guess The Hunger Games, it's not the strongest movie, in my opinion. It definitely has a lot of the YA trappings. To their credit, though, they don't use a lot of CGI or anything like that in this movie. When they do use it, though, oh my God, like, oof, oof, oof.
Those dogs at the very end, they were kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you might as well just made the screen black because you didn't want to show anything that was happening on there. That was a bad style choice.
This is going to be one book thing I bring up, and I know I shouldn't, but the dogs in the book have like strong comparisons to the dead tributes, where they can see like, oh, that's this person, that's that person. Like they genetically combined like the dead tributes to a dog, to the mutts. So that it's like, yeah. So, I mean, that would have been a disaster to do, right. I'm sure, which is why they didn't do it. But I think it made it more terrifying and more personal, too, because you're like, no, that's really so-and-so.
Yeah, I guess I could see that.
Weird.
Yeah.
A cool concept.
I'll have to look that up. That's interesting.
Yeah. Cool concept, but just...
I could be misremembering it, but I feel like I vividly remember that from the books.
Right. No, again, a very interesting concept, I think. It's just, unfortunately, they choose not to adapt it here, so it's just something that's, that's what we have in this movie. There's one other thing that I wanted to talk about, which I don't remember now, of course, because Julie got me off track here with her talking of mongrels and whatnot. But yeah, the Hunger Games, I think its biggest sin, and you know what? Let's just jump into our final scores, because then that's when I'll be able to talk about this. I'm going to give The Hunger Games a 7 out of 10.
Okay, so when do we start?
Oh, so eager. Most of you aren't in such a hurry.
Yeah, I want to know what the plan is. You're our mentor. You're supposed to go...
Mentor?
Yeah, our mentor. You're supposed to tell us how to get sponsors and give us advice.
Oh, okay. Embrace the probability of your imminent death. And know, in your heart, that there's nothing I can do to save you.
So why are you here then?
The refreshments.
Okay, I think that's enough of that.
You made me spill my drink. It's brand new pants.
It's a fine movie. I think it's a passable movie. It's not. I don't think it's the best movie, and it's interesting how this ushered in a whole series of these kind of movies, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the other ones that kind of happened around this time when we get further into the series. But Hunger Games, it's fine. I personally have just not interested in it with like Katniss. I don't think she's very likable. But unfortunately, I do like the world. I really do like the world in this movie. I think it is very intriguing, very interesting. It's just, unfortunately, I think this movie is just bogged down by one thing. If I could just kind of lay it all out there, it played a little too safe. I think they could have done a lot more with this movie. Maybe a little more stylized, a little more intriguing. Again, the world building's there. We just need a little bit more of it. But this is a very by the books, young adult kind of movie. And unfortunately, it's just a little too safe for me. And I would have liked a little bit more. But again, I'm wrong because, there were 3 more movies made after this. But I'm curious to see what you guys think too. So, Adam, how about you? What do you think?
I think I'm going to give The Hunger Games... I liked it more than you did.
Right.
I think I'm going to give it a 7.9 out of 10.
Thank you for your consideration.
I did like it. There obviously I have my issues with it. And I think it sets up. I literally watched the second one right after this one, so it immediately hooked me. So I want to see more. It's just there were some parts where it just kind of lingered, especially in the beginning, where it's just such a slog to get to the main part, which is what I wanted to see.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I did enjoy it.
Yeah, I think there's some credence to this world, being as successful as it is, and it is interesting. I definitely do think so. But Julie, how about you? You're the last one. What do you think?
I'm going to give The Hunger Games an 8 out of 10.
We were all very moved, I think, when you volunteered for her at the reaping. Did she come and say goodbye to you?
Yes, she did.
She did. And what did you say to her in the end?
I told her that I would try to win. That I would try to win for her.
Of course you did. And try you will.
Ladies and gentlemen, from District 12, Katniss Everdeen, the girl on fire!
While your criticisms are definitely valid, it's a great, first step into the world of Panem and the Hunger Games. And it's an enjoyable movie. This is probably the third time I've watched this movie in the past 7 months. So I enjoy this world. I'm excited to keep exploring it.
Yeah, I think so. I think, the Hunger Games is as popular as it is because I think the world just is that intriguing. And, again, I think a lot of the actors, they've kind of grown from this. We'll see Jennifer Lawrence go on to great things after this. Most of the older adult actors already had successful careers going into this, but it is interesting. I think the Hunger Games, it does catch you by the end of the movie, and it did intrigue me to see what happens next. And I really can't wait to talk about the next movie. So I think we're going to end it there. But again, guys, let us know in the comments below. What did you think of the Hunger Games? It's the movie that set fire to 1,000 children killing each other in arena kind of movies and series. What do you think? Do you think it's one of the best ones, one of the worst ones? What could have been improved? If you want to talk about the book differences and whatnot, go for it. Have fun in the comments. I know you people like to talk about that stuff. But hey, I'm going by what I'm given in the movie. All right? It is what it is. But what I want to do is thank you guys all so much for joining us for this episode of The Real Review. My name's Kevin. That's Adam and Julie. We are your real movie guys. Real guys, real movies, real thoughts. Catch you guys next time. If you guys like what you've seen here today, consider giving this video a like and leaving your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to stay up to date with everything Real Movie Guys related, make sure to hit that subscribe button and check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And don't forget, all you audio listeners at home, we are available on many podcasting platforms. Just search The Real Movie Guys, we should pop right up. Thank you again all so much for joining us on this episode of The Real Review. We are The Real Movie Guys. Real guys, real movies, real thoughts. Catch you next time.